The trash bag hit the floor at my feet with a dull, heavy thud. 120 people, 120 pairs of eyes turning toward me all at once. The grand hall of the estate my father had built over 40 years, with the crystal chandelier still lit and the funeral flowers still smelling of white lilies. And my sister Nicole, in her Italian designer dress and her $400 manicure, had just thrown a black garbage bag at my feet like I was the hired help. "Mary." Her voice was sweet the way poison is sweet. "Your lease on this life is up. Pack your cheap things and get out. This estate is worth $9,400,000, and I'm selling it tomorrow. You were never anything more than the housekeeper here." I felt the cold crawl up the back of my neck. My fingers went completely still at my sides. I was 65 years old. I had spent 30 years caring for my father, and my 38-year-old sister, who had not set foot in this house in 5 years, had just told me to leave with a garbage bag in front of every single person we knew. I said nothing. Because what I knew at that moment, she had absolutely no idea. I want you to understand what 30 years actually means. Not as a number, as a life, as skin, as time that leaves and never comes back. I was 35 when my father had his first heart attack. I was a marketing director at a logistics company. I had my own apartment, a serious boyfriend, concrete plans for a future I could actually see. Within a week, I walked away from all of it. My boss looked me in the eye and said, "Mary, if you leave now, don't bother coming back." I left anyway. The first 5 years were the hardest. My father was an old-school man, a real estate magnate who had built his fortune property by property, deal by deal, and he did not want help from anyone outside the family. He said nurses stole from him and doctors experimented on their patients. He only wanted me. And I was there. Every night, every fever, every 2 a.m. crisis, every pill split into 4 pieces because swallowing had become difficult for him. I calculated once how many nights I spent in the plastic chair next to his bed. I worked it out in a notebook one Sunday afternoon, using the blue pen my father always used to sign contracts. 10,950 nights, 30 years, every single night. When my father needed the experimental treatment in Zurich, the one the insurance company refused to cover because it was too new and too uncertain, I did not think twice. I went to the bank on a Thursday morning. I signed the papers. I wired the money. $112,000. Every cent I had saved since the age of 28. 27 years of working without vacations, without indulgences, without ever buying anything I did not absolutely need. Gone in one afternoon. The Swiss doctor looked at me when we arrived and asked, "Are you the daughter?" I said yes. He turned to my father and said, "Mr. Hartman, you are a very lucky man." My father said nothing. He just wrapped his thin fingers around my hand and closed his eyes. Nicole was in the Maldives at that time. I know because I saw the photographs on her profile. 14 nights at a water bungalow resort, cocktails and turquoise sunsets, and the kind of photographs that are designed to make other people feel small. When I called her to say that our father needed the treatment urgently and that I could not manage the cost alone, she did not answer. The first time I thought it was an error. The second time, a misunderstanding. The third time, I understood. Nicole had blocked my number, her own sister, while I was wiring $112,000 to a clinic in Zurich to keep our father alive. I filed that away, deep down, in the place where you keep the things you cannot say out loud without everything falling apart. I found the documents by accident, 6 months before my father died. He had a difficult episode in October, a high fever that left him confused and disoriented for hours. At one point of clarity, he grabbed my arm and asked me to find the blue folder in the large drawer of his desk. I found the blue folder. It was a collection of old medical receipts, but next to it was a sealed manila envelope with my name written by hand in the same blue pen I recognized immediately. I did not open it that night. I put it under my winter clothes in my room and did not touch it for weeks. My father recovered. Life settled back into its usual rhythm, and on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in November while he slept, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea and opened the envelope. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, company names I did not recognize. Starline Holdings, LLC, Monaco Blue Capital, Riviera Asset Management. Page after page of numbers and dates and signatures, and a total at the bottom of the last page that knocked the air out of me. $850,000, transferred in 23 separate transactions over the previous 4 years. every single one authorized under Nicole's signature as power of attorney over my father's accounts. I called a lawyer that same week. An older man, discreet, named Mr. Calloway, who had worked with my father since the 1980s. I put the documents on his desk without saying a word. He put on his reading glasses, reviewed everything for 30 minutes in complete silence, and finally looked up at me. Mary, this is misappropriation of funds, potentially tax fraud as well. Does your father know these documents exist? I don't know, I said. Then you're going to have to ask him. That evening I walked quietly into my father's room. He was awake, staring at the ceiling with that expression of his, the one that meant he was thinking about things nobody else could see. I laid the papers on the bed without speaking. He looked at them for a moment. Then he looked at me. I know everything, he said. His voice was small but steady, the way it always was when he had already made up his mind about something. She has been doing this for years. I waited to see how far she would go. I felt ice move through me. And what are you going to do? He smiled. A tired smile. An old smile. The smile of someone who has seen too much to be surprised anymore. I already did it, Mary. He said nothing more that night. I turned off the light, closed the door, and did not sleep at all. My father died 6 months later, on a Tuesday at 4 a.m. I was there, in the same chair as always, when his breathing slowed and then stopped. I held his hand. I told him it had been an honor, and I sat in silence for a full hour before I called anyone. The funeral was 3 days after that, and Nicole arrived by taxi from the airport with 2 brand-new Louis Vuitton suitcases, Chanel sunglasses, and a fur coat that cost more than my car. She hugged the cousins with theatrical warmth. She cried in a very photogenic way, using a silk handkerchief that somehow left her makeup perfectly intact. And for the first 2 hours she ignored me completely, the way you ignore a piece of furniture. When she finally spoke to me, it was to tell me I needed to organize the transfer of her things into the master bedroom. My father's bedroom. The one that still smelled like his cologne. And then, in front of 120 people gathered in the main hall, she threw the garbage bag at my feet and said what she said. What happened in the minutes after that was, in some ways, more painful than the bag itself. My brother Edward, the oldest of all of us, the one who had spent his whole life presenting himself as the reasonable one, took me by the arm and walked me out to the garden before I could say a word. He closed the glass door behind us. Mary, do not make a scene. My voice went thin as a blade. Did you just see what she did? Nicole is Nicole. You've always known that. She's under stress. Grief affects her differently than it affects us. Edward, she threw a garbage bag at my feet in front of 120 people at our father's funeral. He sighed in that slow, condescending way of his that I had been watching for 50 years. Be the bigger person. Don't ruin Dad's funeral over this. Then came my cousin Linda with her peacemaker smile. Mary, you know Nicole has her financial pressures. Monaco is expensive. She needs liquidity quickly. Just try to be understanding. Then my Uncle Robert, who put a hand on my shoulder with that false family warmth. You're the oldest. You have to set the example. Let her have the house. You've always been the strong one. You'll be fine. 6 different people in 2 hours, all of them saying the same thing in different words. Give in. Forgive. Be quiet. Disappear. Be understanding. Be generous. Be invisible. I felt something cold and very heavy settle in the center of my chest. Not grief. Something cleaner than grief. Something sharper. Clarity. Nobody in that room saw me as a person. They saw me as the obstacle between them and a smooth inheritance. The inconvenience that needed to be managed. The problem that solved itself if you just kept telling it to be gracious and walk away. I went to the bathroom at the end of the hall, locked the door, stared at myself in the mirror for a full minute without looking away. And then I remembered my father's voice. I already did it, Mary. I took my phone out of my pocket and called Mr. Calloway. It's time, I said when he answered. For the next 3 weeks, I said nothing to anyone. Nicole moved into the master bedroom with her new luggage. She changed the lock on my father's office using a locksmith she hired herself. She had professional photographs taken of the estate for a luxury property listing. She met with 3 different real estate agents. She behaved like a woman who had already won. I kept sleeping in my same room. the small one at the end of the hall with the window that looked out over the rose garden my father had planted in 1979. Every morning I got up at 7, made black coffee, and worked quietly with Mr. Calloway. What he showed me in his office left me without words for almost a full minute. My father had created an irrevocable living trust 48 hours before he died. The estate, the bank deposits, the 3 commercial properties downtown, the investment funds he had spent a lifetime building, everything, every single asset, transferred into a trust of which I was the sole lifetime beneficiary. When did he come here to sign it? I asked. Mr. Calloway looked at me over his glasses. Monday evening, 2 days before he passed. He came in a wheelchair. It took him 40 minutes to sign all the documents because his hands were not cooperating, but he signed every page. He told me he had been waiting for the right moment for weeks. I felt something break open inside my chest. Not pain, something deeper and older than pain. And Nicole? He opened a second folder. Under the testamentary provisions, Nicole inherits the old holding company, Starline Holdings in its entirety. I paused. Starline Holdings. The same. I already knew exactly what that meant. Nicole had no idea. I spent those 3 weeks gathering every document with the same precision I had developed over 30 years of managing a sick man's life. The bank statements showing all 23 transfers. The corporate registration records for the 3 shell companies. The email chains between Nicole and the account manager. A clean, clear, completely airtight trail. I also hired a forensic accountant that Mr. Calloway recommended. A sharp young woman with red-framed glasses who went through everything in 72 hours and handed me a 47-page report bound in dark blue. The conclusion was simple and final. Starline Holdings, the company Nicole was about to inherit, carried $6,200,000 in tax debt. Debt accumulated over 4 years of fraudulent financial maneuvers executed under Nicole's authorized signature as power of attorney. The person who inherited that company inherited that debt too. Personally. Legally, with no way to transfer it and no way to escape it. Nicole was about to inherit a ticking bomb with her own name written on every wire, and she had absolutely no idea. The meeting was on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock in Mr. Calloway's office. Nicole arrived 20 minutes late, as always, reading her phone as she walked in, not apologizing to anyone. She sat down and crossed her legs, still wearing her coat. Edward arrived shortly after. 2 cousins waited in the outer room because there was not enough space. Mr. Calloway waited for complete silence. Then he opened his folder on the dark wood desk and said, with the absolute calm of a man who has delivered difficult news for 40 years, "We will now proceed with the reading of the final and binding last will and testament of Mr. Hartman." Nicole looked up from her phone for the first time since she had entered the room. Mr. Calloway read, slowly, every clause, every number, every name, the irrevocable living trust, my name, the estate, every asset, all of it. The silence afterward lasted exactly 30 seconds. I counted. Nicole turned to me with narrowed eyes. "This cannot be legal." "It is entirely and completely legal," said Mr. Calloway without looking up. It was signed with full mental capacity in the presence of 2 certified witnesses and a notary. "You manipulated him." She pointed her finger at me across the table. "You manipulated a dying old man. That is undue influence, and I will prove it." My voice came out differently than it had in years. Cold, without tremor, without apology. "Nicole, our father came to this office in a wheelchair, under his own direction, 2 days before he died. He spent 40 minutes signing documents with his own hands. Does that sound like manipulation to you? You haven't seen Dad in 5 years." Edward's voice, not directed at me. Nicole opened her mouth. 5 years, Nicole. Mary was there every single night, every night for 30 years. Where were you when he needed the Zurich treatment? Where were you during the fever crises? Where were you at 4 in the morning when his breathing was wrong? The silence that followed was different from the one before it, heavier, truer. Mr. Calloway continued in the same steady voice. "Miss Nicole will inherit the Starline Holdings Company in its entirety, pursuant to the provisions of the prior testamentary documents that retain validity for that specific asset." Nicole exhaled. She relaxed slightly in her chair, nodded once. "Fine. That still has value." I waited exactly 1 second. Then I took the 47-page report, bound in dark blue, and placed it on the table in front of her. Nicole, before you leave this room, you need to read this. She looked at it, then at me. For the first time that morning, she really looked at me. What is that? It is a forensic accounting report on the actual financial condition of Starline Holdings. I paused for one beat. The company carries $6,200,000 in outstanding tax debt. That debt was generated over 4 years of fraudulent financial activity conducted under your signature as authorized power of attorney. The color left her face in a matter of seconds. That's not... The tax authorities were notified this morning, said Mr. Calloway in his calm, precise way. As the sole heir to the company, you assume direct and non-transferable personal legal liability for the entirety of that debt. Nicole opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I had a financial manager. He handled everything. I just signed what he put in front of me. That was not my direct responsibility. I placed 3 more pages on the table. These are the 23 email chains in which you personally authorize each transfer to the shell companies, with your digital signature, from your Monaco email address, date, time, and read confirmation on every single one. The sound she made was not quite crying. It was something more primitive than crying, the sound of a person watching the floor disappear beneath their feet all at once. Edward picked up the report, read it for 2 full minutes in complete silence, set it back down carefully on the table, looked at his hands, said nothing. At 2 o'clock that same afternoon, I was in the upstairs sitting room when the intercom at the front gate buzzed. I walked to the window. It was a tow truck from the rental company. They were taking the red Ferrari that Nicole had parked in the estate driveway the day she arrived. A Ferrari that, as I had discovered that same morning, was a lease with 3 months of missed payments. Nicole came running out the front door with her coat half on, her hair loose, no makeup for what I suspected was the first time in her adult life. She was shouting something at the tow truck operator. He showed her the repossession paperwork. She read it, crumpled it, threw it onto the driveway. I watched from the upstairs window with a cup of coffee in my hand. I did not feel joy. I did not feel the satisfaction you imagine you would feel in a moment like that. I felt something stranger and quieter than both of those things. Justice, in its real, undecorated version, without music, without heroism, just the natural consequence of 30 years of truth meeting 30 years of lies. Nicole came back inside. She walked up the stairs. She stopped in the hallway of the first floor. She looked at me from the other end of the corridor with her eyes red and her face completely open in a way I had never once seen in my life. Mary. Her voice was different. No edges, no polish, no Monaco. What am I going to do? I looked at her for a long, quiet moment. The same thing I did for 30 years, I said. Work. I turned around, walked into my room, the small one at the end of the hall, with the window that looked out over the rose garden my father had planted in 1979. I closed the door slowly behind me. 8 months have passed since that day. The estate is still mine. I have received 3 serious offers and turned them all down. Instead, I have converted the ground floor into something I believe my father would have approved of. A support residence for unpaid family caregivers who have nowhere else to turn. People who have spent years caring in silence, sacrificing their own lives without knowing whether any of it was being seen, without knowing whether any of it mattered. Someone was watching. I was watching. Because for 30 years, I was one of them. Nicole is in the middle of a complicated legal process that I choose not to detail here. What I do know is that she sold her Monaco apartment within 2 months to cover the first round of payments, and she is currently renting a small flat on the outskirts of the city. We have not spoken since that afternoon in the hallway. I do not know if we ever will. That part is no longer in my hands. Edward called me 3 weeks ago. It was a short conversation without decoration. He said he was sorry. I told him I heard him. That is not the same as forgiveness, but at my age I have learned that beginnings are the most honest thing there is. What I took from all of this is not that justice always arrives, because sometimes it does not. Sometimes people cause damage and live well and nothing ever happens to them, and the world keeps turning regardless. That is also real, and pretending otherwise is a kind of lie I'm no longer willing to tell myself. What I took from this is something simpler. Silence is not weakness, patience is not surrender, and there is an enormous difference, a life-changing difference between being a good person and being the person that everyone else uses to feel good about themselves. 10,950 nights. $112,000, 30 years. I did not do any of it for an inheritance. I did it because he was my father, and I loved him with all the plainness and all the complexity that loving someone for an entire lifetime actually contains. But this time, something was keeping count. This time, there was someone watching from a wheelchair with a blue pen and 40 minutes of absolute determination. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer. What would you have done in my position? When everyone around you was telling you to give in, to be gracious, to not ruin anything, to just walk away with your garbage bag? Would you have waited in silence for 3 weeks with the documents in your hand? Or would you have said everything you needed to say that very afternoon in front of everyone? Write it in the comments right now. Because I genuinely want to know whether there are more people like me out there. People who have cared for years in silence without anyone ever asking how they were doing. People who held on long past the point when anyone else would have let go. Or maybe I was just the only one stubborn enough to stay.